Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for helping us get a handle of this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me now on the phone. Ed, how does, being a former president, being a case based on the actions only a person in his position can do, change the case from what we're used to in criminal trials, where, I mean, this is all brand new territory here for a federal indictment of a former president?
It sure is, John, and it's notable that he announced this, as you've been pointing out. He announced this himself on a social media platform that he established, and then just minutes later, his campaign sent out a fundraising email telling his followers, telling those that have been donating sums of money to his election campaign that he was indicted and asking them to donate again to keep that campaign going. This is uncharted territory, of course, and something very different for American politics and even for the American legal system, because you've never had somebody quite like this face this kind of indictment from federal prosecutors. And so we wait to see here in the coming hours how other candidates in the Republican contest react. I can tell you over at the White House, they have no official comment tonight. They've referred us to the Justice Department. The Justice Department, of course, has referred us to the Special Counsel's Office, which our colleagues say has no comment tonight. The president was asked about this. This is sort of about the, concern that there may be people now in the country anticipating this indictment, and what he would say to convince skeptics that they should trust the independence and fairness of the Justice Department that Trump continues to attack. The president, in a news conference alongside the British Prime Minister, said, quote, "I have never once, not one single time, suggested to the Justice Department what they should do or not do relative to bringing a charge or not bringing a charge," he said, as his temper kind of got the best of him. In other words, trying to say to people, unlike my predecessor, who dabbled and tried to interfere in Justice Department activities, he has not done so, both because of the criminal cases, the investigations surrounding the former president, but also the one surrounding his own son, which continues as well with a federal prosecutor out of Delaware. So in other words, saying, I have not meddled, I don't intend to meddle, and I can tell you based on our reporting at the White House that they do great work to try to wall off the White House from the Justice Department when it comes to these matters. Every other time there's been some other development in the Trump cases, when you ask the White House, did you get any heads up? They said, we learned about it the way you did on the news, or through you guys. We did not get any kind of formal heads up, and that's by design.
And they are trying to maintain a line, which is what really this case is all about. What are the lines of the law, and do they apply to all Americans equally, even to former presidents? Ed, you've been out in Iowa. You've been covering Republican presidential candidates. Former President Trump is the leader of the Republican Party. He is the far and away frontrunner in that race. Given what you're reporting and what you've seen, what's your sense of how this is received in the political world? Because obviously the president announcing this on social media first is taking advantage of his political support and rallying them for his legal case.
And he's doing that because he remembers that when he was indicted in Manhattan, his numbers went up. And I think his opponents remember that as well, that the support, if anything, is just solidified and may have grown depending on how Republican voters were being surveyed. So we'll see here in the coming days how Iowa Republicans, New Hampshire Republicans, South Carolina Republicans, so we'll get the first crack at this, respond to this. And then how the party does overall nationally. And you've seen most of his opponents say, look, if he wasn't the guy who had been president and was running again, the Justice Department might not be doing this to him. In other words, saying he's being targeted because he's a Republican president and this is a Democratic administration. But I can tell you, John, if you continue to look at those numbers that suggest maybe 35, 40, 45% support for him, and it's not getting beyond that, the other candidates know, if you do the math, that there's a universe out there that he can be beat if you can clear the field and keep it to just fewer candidates. And we talk to voters who say, look, I appreciate what he did. If it's ultimately him versus President Biden, I'll do it if I have to. But there are other options out there. I'd like to hear from them because this other guy, as one voter put it to me, has just a lot of stuff. Trump, his baggage, in other words. And if there's somebody else who can do this and not come with all the legal and personal baggage of the former president, then at least that voter and many others we have heard from and we suspect are out there and the campaigns believe are out there, may ultimately opt to go with somebody else. But it's just too soon to say here, knowing that there will be various ways that this news is consumed and absorbed by people across the country tonight. And then we'll see how his opponents react. Some of them are set to be on television tonight or tomorrow, or will be campaigning tomorrow, making appearances across the country. And we'll see how, if at all, they discuss this and either express support for him or suggest that the legal process should continue to play out. This is uncharted territory like we've never seen before, both within the Republican Party and then, of course, for Democrats sitting there waiting to see what that party ultimately decides to do ahead of next year's election.
And just to remind those who are perhaps just tuning in, a multiple count indictment CBS News has confirmed of retention of national defense documents and also obstruction of justice. Ed, it occurs to me the president will appear in Miami at a federal courthouse on Tuesday at 3 p.m., according to the former president, but we've confirmed that it'll be Tuesday. This is going to draw out unless the president reaches a deal, which Bob Costa suggests there's not any small, even sliver of a chance that he will, that the former president will fight this with everything that he can, but that this will roll out through the primaries, during all the debates, perhaps into the general election.
Well, we know already that at least the Manhattan case is scheduled to roll out through the general election, and at least or towards the end of the primary season next March, when he is slated to appear in a Manhattan courtroom to face those charges related to business practices primarily there in New York. Who knows what the schedule will be like in terms of the federal case. And we still, of course, are awaiting word of a potential indictment in Georgia with the election interference charges that are believed to be the focus of the investigation there. So, yes, we very well may see the frontrunner for the Republican Party nomination sitting in courtrooms in Atlanta or New York or Washington or Miami, or shuttling between all of them while still somehow maintaining a campaign for president. And that is where I wonder at what point does the party tolerate that? Do voters tolerate that? If there are other opponents out there who aren't in courtrooms but are instead in the VFW halls and the church basements and the living rooms of voters in those early primary states, eager to hear what they have to say.
Ed, I wonder if you have any thoughts about whether the nature of these charges, as we understand them, change what has been a pretty familiar pattern in the age of Donald Trump, which is to say there are accusations, sometimes made in the press, sometimes made by officials, and there's a rallying around the president. What's different in this case is that these are documents that are so sensitive in the handling of them, perhaps during this trial, they might have to go into special accommodations because some of this information, as we understand from our reporting, is as sensitive as it gets, which leads us to national security, which leads us to sensitivities. And I wonder, this is where the question comes, whether you think as a political matter, the fact that these are national security documents, these are secrets, perhaps the most valuable of the United States, that might change the political reaction, particularly from members of Congress who are stewards of those same secrets, the leaders of Congress who get to see these secrets in the president's own party, whether that will perhaps change the traditional political rallying behind the former president.
Perhaps, but let's remember we're still awaiting resolution of the Justice Department investigation into the sitting president's handling of this kind of information at his home and at his former office when he was a former vice president. So that, because remember, in the wake of the two investigations beginning earlier this year, you had members of both parties up on Capitol Hill saying, well, this just clearly shows us that there's a systemic institutional issue with classification of documents. And so unless they can prove in court or start to allege that something he was in possession of caused other things to happen in the national security realm, there may very well be Republicans who say, okay, yeah, but the other guy was doing it too. And so did former Vice President Mike Pence, who was just cleared by the Justice Department last week. So it may be less a partisan or concern about Trump issue. It may just revive the belief that Democrats and Republicans had on both sides that there are systemic concerns with how anyone gets to handle this information. And I think absent details of the result of him having that information and what risks there might have been, that would continue to be the argument that both sides would make. We'll see.
We'll see. And is it your understanding? You mentioned that the White House, they're not going to be commenting on this at all. The president affirmed that in his comments at a press conference on Thursday. What's your sense of the rest of the Democratic Party and the pressures that some of them might feel or opportunities they might see to engage in the political side of this process, which is partially what the former president would like, given his past practice of baiting his opponents?
Yeah, and I think that'll be a real test, is how does the Democratic Party, at least writ large, respond to this? Look, they've been making the argument he's dangerous to democracy, he's dangerous to the rule of law, that Republicans continue to support him and other people who denied reality about the 2020 elections. If they so choose, they'll continue to lose elections. So yes, watching the fringes of the party or those that are more outspoken react to this in the coming days, and how that could blow back on Democrats certainly remains to be seen. I would think that there are some more senior leaders or those involved in the campaign who would urge restraint and silence, in essence, and allow this to play out and allow Republicans to be left to have to respond to this on the campaign trail and on Capitol Hill and in other ways as this plays out next week. The president is set to go tomorrow, the current president, to North Carolina with his wife for two different events. North Carolina is a state that the White House believes the president can win for Democrats again, the first time since 2008. And he'll be focused on some economic and military issues in a state where both of those topics are top of mind, believing that having only lost by a few points in 2020, it's gettable for them next year. And, conceivably, with that state's mix of centrists and independents, if this keeps up and if the Republican Party doesn't react the way voters in that state want, that's where I think Democrats think they might have a chance. And that will be the goal throughout the rest of this year. Keep the president being president, meeting with world leaders, greeting the troops, talking about the economy and all the things he had done over the last 2 years to potentially set the economy in a great shape going forward, and stay out of this stuff, the legal problems facing his predecessor, as long as possible, in hopes that voters see him as a serious option and worthy of reelection. And
that North Carolina event will be one to watch with the former president, the former vice president, and I think also the current sitting governor, Ron DeSantis, of Florida. Ed O'Keefe, thank you. We're going to go to Scott MacFarlane, who has some for us in Washington, who has CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane, who has some new information. Scott, what can you tell us?
Now, CBS News confirms it will be an arraignment proceeding Tuesday afternoon in the Southern District of Florida. When you go for arraignment in the federal court system, they read you the charges. They give you a chance to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. And typically, John, they set bond conditions for a defendant, a criminal defendant, at an arraignment. It will be fascinating and potentially provocative to find out what bond conditions are ordered and agreed upon for a former president of the United States. In the Southern District of Florida, they refer to the assignment of cases to blind random selection, which is true for other federal courts in America as well. They will truly pick a name out of a computer-generated system to assign the district court judge for this case. Now, he may appear before a magistrate judge, a lower-level judge who handles just initial proceedings Tuesday, but ultimately this case moves to a federal court judge, a district court judge, some of whom in Florida, some of whom in Miami, have been appointed by then-President Trump, which opens up a whole nother kettle of fish. We had one House Judiciary Committee member today, Glenn Ivey, Democrat from Maryland, former federal prosecutor, who told CBS News, if this case is assigned to a Trump-appointed judge, that judge should seriously consider recusal based on the unprecedented and unique political dynamic at play there. But the arraignment is Tuesday afternoon at the federal courthouse in Miami. Now, we have seen Donald Trump arraigned quite recently in Manhattan in that local prosecution from Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. And when that happened, there was this intense and large in scope security protocol and restriction put in place near the courthouse to get Donald Trump into the courthouse safely, to keep all those who'd gathered there safe. Presumably, the same thing's going to happen in Miami, where they cordon off part of that city, that vibrant, busy city, to get a former president into a pre-announced place at a pre-announced time. Many federal courthouses in America have openings, entrances that are not publicly accessible or publicly viewable. That's how inmates who are in jail before court cases go into court. They don't walk through the front door. They're detained by marshals and they're driven into a private entrance. Presumably, a former president could make use of a private entrance, and we know that because when Mike Pence recently appeared in the D.C. federal court to speak to the grand jury there, he was ushered in a private, secret entrance, not viewable to the public. Wouldn't be surprising, John, to see the same thing happen Tuesday afternoon in Florida.
Scott McFarland in Washington. Thank you so much, Scott.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, we're going to tell you about that, too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Now one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether.
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
I'm here.
Fire and rescue is out. They're doing wellness checks as people are trapped inside their homes.
How's the pay?
A lot better.
That's you and the Queen. That's beautiful.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely.
As Taiwan faces threats and aggression,
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, they are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we
unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be.
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back. CBS News has confirmed former President Donald Trump has been indicted in the special counsel's criminal probe into his handling of classified documents. Trump has been ordered to appear in federal court in Miami, Florida, Tuesday for his arraignment. He has long denied any wrongdoing in the case. The charges stem from the discovery of more than 300 sensitive materials found at his Florida estate during an FBI search last August. And joining me now is white-collar criminal defense attorney Venu Varghese. Venu, lay out for us, well, how serious is this? We know it's retention of national security defense documents and obstruction. How serious is that?
I think this is the most serious charges that he could be potentially facing. And if I were his team, this would be the one that concerns me more than what's going on in Manhattan. The Manhattan case in state court there has numerous problems, legal issues. The fact that they indicted him here means that they believe that they have enough evidence to go forward. The DOJ generally, doesn't move forward unless they believe they have enough. The problem for them is that this is going to be viewed as a political prosecution and in the circles that Donald Trump runs in, a persecution or continued persecution. And for them, from a factual point of view, and obviously we're just hearing this, we don't have the indictment, and we are a long way away from knowing what the actual evidence is. What's been out there so far seems to me to be questionable. And what I mean by that is you have something that really cuts in the way of politics, a political question over whether he should have kept it or not. And now now you've actually charged a former president, a person who's actually running for president again. And it's hard to stay back and look at this, or sit back and look at this and say, is this devoid of politics? That's going to be a tough question for Merrick Garland.
But there's definitely been a former Army, I believe it was a former Army lieutenant colonel was just sentenced to 3 years, I believe it was, for retention of documents. So if the signature proposition of American law is that no one is above the law, if it happens to a lieutenant colonel, presumably it should also be able to happen, if the facts are proved and so forth, it should be able to happen to a former president.
Look, what you're saying is correct from a purely theoretical point of view, but the charging decisions are never just theoretical. They are practical. And in this case, in this environment, does it make sense for the Department of Justice to charge the former president, the most recent former president, and the person who's running for president again? And on top of this, you have a situation that seemed to be mishandled from the beginning by Merrick Garland. They could have made this a public thing and say, look, Mr. Trump, I'm giving you, or President Trump, I'm going to give him his proper accolades as a former president, and say, we're going to give you till this date to return the documents. And then there was the execution of a search warrant. Well, they should have been clear that if you don't do it by this date, we're going to execute a search warrant on your home. They didn't say that.
But I mean,
they didn't say that the FBI is going to go in if you don't do it by this date.
But
that's a problem.
My recollection of the facts of the case is that Mr. Trump or his attorney made representations that he, in fact, had given everything back, and presumably those representations are going to be part of the obstruction case. And I want to ask you about a conspiracy to obstruct, which is to say not just one person and whether you think it might include multiples. But if you make representations that you don't have anything and then you keep something, that's not good. And that's not, I mean, whether you're a former president or not, you can't misrepresent. And in this case, what seems to be the highest level of classification documents, you can't misrepresent that to federal officials.
Well, again, what's been said and what was actually conveyed to his attorney and what his attorney was authorized to say, these are all things that are going to come out. And the other problem that they have is you've learned since then, President Biden had documents in his Delaware home. You've heard that former Vice President Pence had documents in his home. So when you look at all these different things, and you got to say to yourself, is this the wisest course of action for the Department of Justice? And are they going to be able to have a jury that's going to look at the facts and not, whatever side you're on, ultimately, can you prove your case? And part of proving your case is not only whether you have charges that are sufficient to go forward, but whether you can secure a conviction. And I think that will be difficult pretty much everywhere, but in certain places in this country. But I think where they're going to presumably bring this case, or what we understand so far, is if it's in Miami. I mean, that's going to be an interesting locale, and I think they have their job cut out for them to bring the case in Miami.
Speaking of Miami, what do you think we can expect to happen when the former president appears in court on Tuesday?
So, I mean, this is really, really is extraordinary. I mean, he'll have to go in, and he'll be able to go in on his own. He'll get processed, and then it becomes a question whether the United States Marshals, which is the organization that will bring prisoners up into the courtroom, whether they'll give him the courtesy of going up there without being handcuffed. The thing that's different in federal court than in most state courts is that no cameras are allowed in a federal court. That hasn't been approved in any federal court in this country. So you're not going to see cameras, but you'll see sketches. There'll be sketch artists, and he's got to be processed. And so there is an organization called Pretrial Services, which will have to come up with a report and discuss his finances. So, for all those people who are looking at his finances, the different organizations, such as whether it's Congress or the District Attorney's Office in Manhattan, he's got to reveal basically everything to Pretrial Service. That will be one of the conditions. And then he'll be released. I can't imagine there would be any sort of bond. Obviously, we know he's not a flight risk and he's not a danger to the community. These are the two standards to determine whether any bail or bond is going to be set in the federal system, and he doesn't meet either standard. So he's going to be released on his own, but he'll have to report to pretrial, which is fascinating for a former president who has obviously got a Secret Service detail.
Right. Anu Varghese, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
CBS News justice and law enforcement producer Robert Ligari joins me now. Robert, how strong does special counsel Jack Smith's case need to? Well, let me ask you this. What are you looking for? We know something about these indictments. What else are you looking for in what we might learn coming out that's a part of these indictments?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. So first, what we know is our colleagues here at CBS News, Graham Cates, Pat Milton, and Jeff Begaze have confirmed that this is a 7-count indictment. What we're hearing from our sources is this is related to the willful retention of national defense information and obstruction. So what we're looking for now is specifics. We've been staking out the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. for the last 6 to 8 months. And what we've learned is that numerous witnesses have been called to this grand jury, discussing their interactions with the former president, discussing their employment at Mar-a-Lago. They've gone from maids and employees at Mar-a-Lago all the way up to his defense attorney, Evan Corcoran, who was forced to testify despite claims of attorney-client privilege. So what we'll be looking for now is what direct conduct they have tied to the former president and whether or not these charges connect to other people related to the investigation as well.
And Rob, just to grab hold of something you said, the interviews have been so thorough, including with his valet, and others, because one of the lines of investigation is whether people were asked, ordered or otherwise, by the former president to move these documents subsequent to being asked if he had them, which would presumably be a part of an obstruction case.
Yeah, that's right. So what we've learned here at CBS News over the course of this investigation is that prosecutors are honing in, and have honed in clearly now that the indictment has been handed down, as to whether or not their investigation and their attempts to claw back these documents with classified markings were impeded in any way. And so they've been talking to, as you mentioned, his valet, Walt Nauta, and others, curious about whether actions were taken to either move boxes full of classified documents or whether any orders were given in order to do so. And so that specifically as well is we're going to look for in the indictment. And I think it's also important to remember that our colleague Robert Costa, Catherine Herridge, and others have reported that Trump's attorney's notes that were also handed over to the grand jury are also important in this. They show conversations between Trump and his attorney, Evan Corcoran, and that could be illuminating to the prosecutors as well. It's important to recognize that in this case, attorney-client privilege for certain information was waived by a federal judge here in Washington, D.C. to allow that to happen.
And on that Evan Corcoran, it also includes, as I recall, and check me if I'm wrong here, Rob, he at one point dictated into his phone, or so it contains contemporaneous audio of the former president's lawyer talking about conversations he had had with the former president.
That's right. Voice memos are also there as well, and so we're going to be looking for that. One other thing to mention, just as we're talking about this, in terms of recordings, according to our reporting here at CBS News, prosecutors are also in possession of another recording of the former president from July 2021 in Bedminster, his golf club in New Jersey, in which, according to our reporting, he's discussing a document that is allegedly classified related to Iran. And so that as well leads prosecutors to think that maybe there was knowledge or recognition that that document could have been classified.
And on that specific point, under the Espionage Act, there's a kind of two-part test, at least as it was a part of the subpoena from last August to get these documents, was it's not just retention, it's also dissemination. And so in terms of that conversation you were just referring to, which also includes the possibility that the former president knew exactly that what he had, he shouldn't have had, was also this idea of dissemination. That he's not just holding on to it, but he's doing something with these sensitive materials.
That's right. So when we first got when the search warrant was executed at Mar-a-Lago in August, court proceedings unsealed court documents that showed certain evidence that the prosecutors thought they might uncover in that search warrant. Now, I don't want to get ahead of the indictment. I don't know what it says. We'll have to find out. What we do know, however, is that prosecutors were concerned that he retained that information. What we have now learned from our reporting here is that national defense information is connected to these charges.
Rob, thank you so much for breaking this all down for us. We really appreciate it. Sean Sullivan, Deputy Politics Editor for Campaigns at The Washington Post, joins me now on the phone. Sean, your reaction to this indictment?
Well, it's, really, really early in the process right now. And like a lot of journalists and people in the public, we're trying to assess, what the specific nature of this indictment is going to entail. But, when you pull back for a second, I mean, it's a moment that we have not seen before. We have not seen, a president face federal charges. And, now we are in sort of uncharted territory, both legally, politically, and, we're in the midst of a campaign right now for the Republican nomination where this former president is now the front runner, at least at the moment, for the Republican nomination. Almost every public poll in both early states and nationally shows him to be the favorite. And that's the other question here is what is the political impact of this going to be? When you look back earlier this year at what happened when, he was charged in the New York case, there was a rallying effect to him. You saw Republicans rally to his side. You saw him raise a lot of money. And you saw a lot of his opponents, steer clear from attacking him over it. Now, the nature of this situation and this indictment is very different from what we saw in New York. The question is whether that will create a different reaction from the public and also from his rivals who are eager to defeat him in this race right now.
Well, and I want to walk down that path you've just outlined for us here, Sean. Let me ask you about fundraising. In the New York case, I think the president was still inside being arraigned when his team put out a fundraising call with a fake mugshot. Has anything like that happened from the Trump camp with respect to this indictment?
Well, I haven't seen anything specific like that yet, but that has been certainly a strategy, as you point out, John, that this campaign has used, that they view these moments as moments where they think that his base will rally to him, where they think that his base will, see him as a target of an unjust investigation. And in fact, we've seen already, in the last few hours here, a video posted on social media by former President Trump saying that, look, I'm innocent and that the government, the Justice Department is being weaponized against me. He is saying, look, this is election interference. He's saying this without evidence. He's saying this without, any specific justifications to back up his claim. But he is effectively accusing the government now of trying to interfere in the next election. And remember, this is a president who has falsely and basically repeatedly claimed that the 2020 election was stolen from him. And so he's starting to do something very similar right now. We've seen this line of argument from him at some of his recent rallies and public speeches.
And that good point you just made about the 2020 election, CBS News polling shows that the majority of primary voters in his party believe him about the 2020 election. Anything from the other campaigns that we're hearing, or what's your sense of the reaction there, Sean?
Well, it's been quiet so far, but it's very early going. And as I said, I think, if you look at the sort of direction of this race over the last week, you've seen former Vice President Mike Pence enter the race with a speech that was very, very critical of Donald Trump, singled him out over January 6th, singled him out over the false claims he's made about a stolen election. You saw Chris Christie launch a campaign this week who said that he is going to be very, very open about drawing a distinction and criticizing the former president. And Ron DeSantis, who is running second right now in a lot of these polls, has shown he's not shying away from attacking Trump. There was a period there of 4 or 5 months where it wasn't clear how exactly DeSantis was going to navigate this. So it is sort of a decision point for these candidates. Do they want to go out there and use this to sort of further their argument against him? Or do they join his cause and join his calls and say, this is a politically motivated attack against him? It's too early right now to really assess, but, I think the reactions we see in the next few hours and tomorrow will be really telling about kind of how Republicans see this politically playing out in this 2024 race.
Sean Sullivan, The Washington Post. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, John.
We're going to take a quick break. We will be right back. You're streaming CBS News Primetime.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman. Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
I'm here.
Fire and rescue is out. They're doing wellness checks and people are trapped inside their homes.
How's the pay?
A lot better.
That's you and the Queen. That's beautiful.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely.
As Taiwan faces threats and aggression.
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, there are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to CBS News Primetime. We want to return to our top story. The 45th president of the United States, Donald Trump, has been indicted over his handling of classified documents. He is now the first former president in U.S. history to face federal charges. Former President Trump responded with a video on social media.
I'm an innocent man. We will prove that again. 7 years of proving it, and here we go again. Very unfair.
And now let's bring in Reuters White House correspondent Jeff Mason. Jeff, let's review the bidding. Remind us how these documents even ended up at the former president's home and how we got here.
Well, that's a good way to start, John. And these documents came after President Trump served 4 years in office and was asked by the Department of Justice to turn over any documents that had ended up at Mar-a-Lago, his home in Florida, and then was accused of not doing so. And more documents were found, and that has spiraled into what we're seeing today. It's interesting to me to see not only President Trump's reaction, but also to think about the political consequences for him as he runs for re-election, for the opponents who are running against him for the Republican nomination, and for President Joe Biden, who will no doubt tomorrow probably try to be silent about this. And I can just imagine all of my colleagues who are traveling with him to North Carolina tomorrow will try to ask him about it. But this is not only a legal story, it is a political story, and it is a social story.
And having covered President Trump, as you did, I remember you asking an important question about whether the president would abide by the Electoral College vote, which is a part of the other part of Jack Smith's investigation. But does the response from the former president to this track with your experience having covered him?
Absolutely. And yeah, I did ask him about that, and that did not go over well. And that's just been an example of the many mistruths and denials that he has made about his own conduct and his policies and his positions for 7 years. I mean, you asked if it tracks. I mean, him saying that this has been 7 years of him having to prove himself an innocent man underscores the fact that it's been 7 years of controversy and, in some cases, legal peril. And that legal peril has come to a head here. But you're also right to mention Georgia. I mean, I think another headline tonight could be more to come. We don't know what else is going to come out of the other investigations, but this is just one. And it's all coming as he's running for re-election, and it's a critical and historic moment.
Indeed. Reuters White House correspondent Jeff Mason, thanks for being with us, Jeff.
My pleasure.
Senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is on his phone there, reporting, as always. It's very nice to see you, Ed, after being on the phone with you. What are the other candidates saying?
Well, we've had a few statements come in, John, from those in the field. Perhaps the most predictable is that from former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, who just a little while and has been a chief critic of the former president, urging him to get out of the race. He reiterates that tonight, saying that Donald Trump's actions, from his willful disregard for the Constitution to his disrespect for the rule of law, should not define our nation or the Republican Party. This is a sad day for our country. While Donald Trump is entitled to the presumption of innocence, the ongoing criminal proceedings will be a major distraction. This reaffirms the need for Donald Trump to respect the office and his campaign. Other Republican contenders, however, lesser known than the former president and some of his top rivals, also weighing in. Vivek Ramaswamy, the 37-year-old business executive who's been catching wind in the early primary states, weighing in a little while ago, saying in part, quote, "We cannot have two tiers of justice, one for Trump on government document retention, another for Biden, one for Assange, another for Manning, one for BLM Antifa, another for peaceful protesters on January 6th. I never thought we would see the day when the U.S. president deputizes the DOJ to arrest his lead rival in the middle of an election." These are quite inflammatory comments by these Republican contenders, but it speaks to the concern, to the opposition, to the anger that a lot of Republican voters have across the country. Remember, the president was asked about this earlier today in a news conference with the British Prime Minister. What would he say to those who are concerned that the Justice Department is being used for political means? The president somewhat angrily responded, pointing out that he had never once, quote, "not one single time suggested to the Justice Department what they should do or not do relative to bringing a charge or not bringing a charge. I'm honest." That was his way of saying, in essence, the former president meddled in Justice Department affairs all the time. The current president, he argued, does not. And in fact, we have asked the White House again tonight, when did the president learn about this? When did the White House learn about this? And several aides tell us that they were informed through media reports, as were most Americans. John.
Senior White House correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Thank you, Ed. Thank you for watching. I'm John Dickerson in New York. You're streaming CBS News Primetime.